was 125 years ago today, on September 17, 1884, that Haskell opened its doors. And prior, actually, Haskell being the second Indian boarding school in all of North American continent. Carlisle Indian Boarding School being the first, but Haskell actually became one of the biggest schools. And 125 years to commemorate Indian education in native North America is a significant milestone today, why we're gathered here. As Patricia was presenting this young man, why is it significant? And I think it's important to know the history, because if you know what your history is, then you have a good sense of where you're going in the future. And I myself, as a speaker today, I'm a survivor also of the Indian boarding school system that happened here. First introduced in the United States of America by the federal government here, was so successful, proven to be so successful, it was later introduced into Canada. The federal government of Canada following suit with the federal government of the USA. It became, as I traveled throughout the nations of the world, a policy that I would run into again and again, with the Australian government dealing with the Aborigines, with the New Zealand government dealing with the Maoris. And on the story goes throughout the nation. But why was Patricia so emotional as she's passing on the baton, so to speak, to signify a new emerging generation that's coming up with an instrument of ours? Because in the boarding school policy, it was actually 1769 when the first actual institution that came about for Indian education in the province, in the state of New Hampshire. And it was basically to convert native people to Christianity. The 150 years the federal government from there grappled with this whole notion to bring about what became known as the assimilation policy that was introduced by this government, and the whole idea was to not only to educate the savages, as the diary said, but to also convert the natives. So it was a collaboration both of federal government and institutionalized churches that came together to bring about institutions. However, there was something that they ran into that they did not anticipate, and that was written in the diaries of the Indian agents that first came amongst our people. And the diaries read something like this: today was another day of school, yet there was no natives in school, because at first they attempted this whole notion of Indian day schools, because the Indian family is such a strong unit that that nothing from the outside could penetrate that. In other words, the family unit of the native people was so strong that there was no new ideologies that could be taught to the people. So the diary went on to say that a strategy meeting would take place, but that out of that strategy meeting would come this whole notion that became the assimilation policy. And the strategy read something like this: the only hope we have of educating the Indian is if we take them at a young age and alienate them from their family. If we could alienate them from their territory, and if we could build schools and institutions, and once we get them in there, to outlaw their language, to outlaw their dances, their songs, to outlaw their instruments, and to outlaw everything about who they are. And if we can do that, then we have a hope of educating them and assimilating them into mainstream America. And so that idea was born, and it became a policy of the federal government, which existed for several generations. And once in the institution, once you got in there, everything about you was outlawed. In my experience, in the first day of the Indian boarding school, was an actual class, an organized class the next morning, that your hair was cut a certain way, that your name were taken and you were given a number to be identified by. Your clothing was taken from you. That you were told that your culture is dead, and in fact, the Creator God made a mistake when He created you an Indian, so we've been sent to these shores to correct the mistake. And when you're 5 years old, you think, no way, I have a grandmother somewhere. I have a mother, I have a home and a village and a community. I have brothers and sisters somewhere. But after 8 years being in an institution, you come home 8 years later after having been institutionalized. You come home to the same grandmother, to the same mother, to the same home, to the same village. And your grandmother and mother address you and greet you in your native language, and all of a sudden you're ashamed. And they feed you, make you your favorite moose stew, your traditional food, and all of a sudden you're ashamed. And you're ashamed of how they're dressed and how they look and how they live. Who had changed in that time frame? It wasn't them, it was we that had been in those institutions. And so we became ashamed of who we were, but we didn't know where we crossed that fine line in all the years we were there. But somewhere between that 5-year-old child and 8 years later, something had changed, and we became a product of the institution. We became institutionalized, and we lost a lot of our nurturing skills during that time in the institution. And so there, after that era of the boarding school came what they call the lost generation, because now they said we could no longer be parents because we didn't know how to nurture the children. And so there was that whole era after that of adopting many native children out into many nations, actually. My own tribe is bringing home children to this day from Thailand, from Scotland. People that are full-blooded of my tribe that speak with a perfect Scottish accent are coming home because they were that era that were adopted out in those days. So there's repatriation that is coming. Now this whole notion of assimilating us into mainstream society to break down one system in order to do it didn't succeed. It didn't succeed. And it's the honor to all of our ancestors and to the young people that are buried in all the boarding schools throughout North American continent